When will this be up? When will it be running? And when will people start to receive money?
Can I ask you a question that in some ways might be impossible to answer, but why do you think it has taken so long? Do you think it's because people are just trying to cover up mistakes, that they couldn't believe what had happened? Do you think it is because they don't want to face the financial consequences, which could run into billions of pounds? Why?
Well, I think there's a bit of everything actually in there. I think there are real issues about the cost, because we are talking about £10 billion now because it's taken so long to get to this point. So I think Treasury were probably very reluctant to actually have the public inquiry in the first place because of that potential liability. I think there's a culture as well that Sir Brian recognises in his report about institutions and institutions protecting themselves rather than being open and transparent, and when things go wrong, setting out what's gone wrong and trying to work with individuals and families. I mean, it's very, very wrong that victims who have been ill, who have had to campaign for all these decades to get to the point now where we know what the truth was, but the state has had all the apparatus of their own lawyers, advisors to say nothing to see here. And there are real parallels here with Hillsborough, with the Windrush scandal, with the Horizon scandal. And I hope one of the other recommendations from Sir Brian is that we look at that cultural change of openness and transparency that we need in institutions, and that we don't just close ranks as politicians when things go wrong.
I want to ask a bit about your own sort of story, because you've really been campaigning on this. You've been pushing for this for, you know, a long time now. And, you know, I started the programme talking about that little boy, Colin, who I just can't get him out of my head. No. It's just so awful. And I just wanted to know if you wanted to speak a bit about your own journey, about anyone that you've spoken to, or anything that's really stuck in your mind.
Well, perhaps if I just talk about Nick Sainsbury. He wasn't my constituent, actually. He lived just outside Hull, but he was a young man who'd gone to the Trelaws boarding school and was a haemophiliac. And he was infected with HIV and hepatitis C. He had to give up work when he was a bit older because he couldn't actually carry on with work because of his health. But he campaigned for decades to try and get justice, to try and find out why that was allowed to happen to him. And to get those answers was really important. He gave evidence to the inquiry, and I read his evidence actually about how this had affected his life. And sadly, he died last year. So he's not here today. He won't know that actually we got the truth now of what happened. We've got some of the answers for him. So Nick sticks in my mind as someone who valiantly battled for all his life to get those answers. And I also want to pay tribute to my own constituent, Glenn Wilkinson, who came to see him in my last surgery before the general election in 2010, told me that he'd been to Hull Royal Infirmary, he'd had a dental operation, he was a mild haemophiliac, and he'd been given infected blood and got hepatitis C, and then how that had affected his life and his family. And he was the inspiration for me, my constituent, of wanting to get those answers. And when I came back after the 2010 election, I was flabbergasted, actually, to find out that obviously Glenn had told me his story, but there were thousands of families that something had happened to, and the state for years had just turned its back and said nothing to see here, and they had to fight. And Glenn, you know, Glenn has fought and fought despite his health. And
you're like, you know, 14 years since he told you that story as well. You know, it's taken an awful long time, and it's a tragedy that not everyone is here to see this moment as well.
Absolutely. There were lots of ghosts at the public inquiry today, but standing alongside us and getting the truth was so important.
Thank you so much for being on the programme. Thank you very much indeed. Well, as we've been hearing, this is a scandal which stretches back decades under governments of both parties. And so we had that rare thing in politics, the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition united in apology and remorse.
Layer upon layer of hurt, endured across decades. This is an apology from the state to every single person impacted by this scandal. It did not have to be this way. It should never have been this way. And on behalf of this and every government stretching back to the 1970s, I am truly sorry. Mr. Speaker, today is a day for the victims and their families, to hear the full truth acknowledged by all, and in the full presence of that truth, to remember the many, many lost loved ones.
I want to acknowledge to every single person who has suffered that in addition to all of the other failings, politics itself failed you. That failure applies to all parties, including my own. There is only one word: sorry. And by that apology, I acknowledge that this suffering was caused by wrongdoing, delay, and systemic failure across the board, compounded by institutional defensiveness.
Let's bring in our panel for this evening, shall we? The former government advisor, Mercy Muroki, and Rhun ap Iorwerth, who is the leader of Plaid Cymru. Thank you both for being with us. It's been an extraordinary day, hasn't it? It was extraordinary actually just watching Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak both apologising. You know, it's not really a day for political point scoring, that kind of rare day. But the stories just stick. I mean, you've done a lot of work on this, haven't you? They just stick in your mind.
They do. I first came across the contaminated blood scandal through constituents of mine who came to see me at a surgery and explained what had happened to them. They wouldn't mind me naming them, Norman and Jennifer. Jennifer was infected. I met them for a coffee last Friday before coming down this week. And after that, I became involved in the cross-party group in the Welsh Parliament, which I happen to now chair. And it was my real honour today to be there to listen to Sir Brian Langstaff's words, a man of intense empathy. It was very moving to be there, and to be there with 1,000+ people who've been living this and fighting this for decades. And to hear those words, sorry, and to hear what action now needs to be taken, and knowing that this should all have been done so many decades ago. It is a day of shame.
Yeah, day of shame is a word for it. We'll talk more about the compensation, what needs to happen next later. But Mercy, it's just gone on so long. I can't get my head around it.
Yeah, I mean, anybody who has listened to the stories, especially the ones to do with children. I mean, I'm a parent. I think you are as well, Sophie. I don't know about you, but you just can't listen to those sorts of stories without your heart breaking. Yeah. And it really does, you know, make you wonder how it was allowed to go on so long, and how, you know, it wasn't just one institution, as the report highlights. It was politicians, it was civil servants, it was doctors. You know, these are people who we're supposed to trust as society to do what needs to be done. And so I think it has raised really serious questions. And I think the most important thing now is, yes, of course, the money, but also the accountability. I think there's more to do in terms of creating that accountability.
It's interesting, isn't it, listening to Amanda Pritchard apologise on behalf of NHS England as well, because like you say, it's doctors, it's the NHS as well, and perhaps the culture in some of these institutions that we hold dear, but we need to do better.
Yeah, and sorry, in one sense, is such an easy word to say, but we've seen today how difficult it is, how intensely difficult it is for politicians or the establishment to put their hands up. And of course, one of the criticisms in the report is the fact that there wasn't recognition until 2017 that there needed to be an inquiry. It was plain to see for long before that the evidence was compelling and clear that something had gone desperately wrong. And it took until then, very, very recently, for government to say, yes, OK, we'll look into this, which was the turning point. But again, too late.
Do you think it is a cultural problem in our politics, but also in our health servants?
I think somebody said earlier, the word self-preservation, it might have been you. There is a tendency to self-preserve. When you have institutions, nobody wants to, you know, admit wrongdoing, especially wrongdoing on such a huge scale. So yes, I think there's a cultural problem, and I think trust really needs to be restored amongst our institutions generally. I mean, trust in politicians is at the lowest level ever. We really can't afford to see trust in all the institutions across our society plummet. We really can't afford to do that.
And this is of a scale on its own, but it's by no means the only scandal that has been suppressed. And I can think of 3 that I've been actively involved in. This one, the post office scandal, and constituents of mine, you know, Noel Thomas, who went to prison, you know, had his 60th birthday in jail because, again, government was refusing to look into evidence was pretty clear. Another one, a pension scandal involving Allied Steel and Wire steelworkers from Cardiff that I've been emphasising recently, where government is failing to recognise that there is a wrong, there is an injustice, and they just have to step up and do the right thing.
And I'll be honest, I've been, aware of these stories, like the post office one, kind of on the periphery, but it's only kind of when they come up and we're really looking at them and examining them that you think, whoa, this is like today, this is such a huge deal.
Yeah,
really
and I think it shows you sort of the lengths that they go to cover it up, and it's not until it's properly raised that people can pay attention. So we do definitely need that visibility for these things.
Thank you both very much indeed. We'll have lots more from both of you throughout the programme as well. Also to say that on the UK Tonight at 8 o'clock, Sarah J. Mee is going to have a special programme about the infected blood scandal. I'm sure, like me, you'll have been really moved by some of the testimony of the victims, and SJ will be giving them an opportunity to tell their stories in depth. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up. The Iranian government confirms that its president was killed in a helicopter crash. What will it mean for a region already at fever pitch? And they think it's all over. It is now. How the end of the football season took on a very political feel.
The journey's been so smooth and overwhelming with the support that's been reaching out to us, from people flying out and joining us on the bikes, as well as support drivers flying out supporting us in Bulgaria, Turkey, as well as tour guides, tour companies reaching out and saying that they want to support us and host us in their countries, and also facilitating sport drivers throughout their country. It's truly been overwhelming with the support that's been getting reached out to us. I actually don't know how I managed to carry on cycling during my fast, because when I look back now, I'm craving food during the cycle. I think I'm not giving myself enough nutrition, so I can't digest how I done that in the first 10 days. But as we've reached Jordan, the weather's just got more and more intense. The heat right now is 36 degrees, so we're having to start our cycles 5 a.m. in the morning just to try and get as much of the cycle done before the height of the sun.
Again, I keep thinking like, oh, it's only 10 days, but we still need to take it day by day, and it's easy to overlook all the days to come because the heat it's 36 degrees right now, and I mean, I'm born in the West. I'm not really used to the heat like that. So, yeah, it's definitely something else. And cycling through it, we will have to go through the night for sure.
That was the main goal of this journey, was to obviously pedal towards Hajj. So I don't think we will actually, myself, I don't think it will actually hit home until we reach the city of Medina and actually visit the Prophet's Mosque. That's when it'll really, I do believe that we will be overwhelmed with emotion.
Hello, welcome back. You're watching the Politics Hub on Sky News, the top stories. Rishi Sunak has apologised to the victims of the infected blood inquiry, describing it as a day of shame for the British state. It's after Sir Brian Langstaff's final report outlined decades of failure and cover-up by governments over several decades. And an emergency meeting of Iran's cabinet has taken place after the country's president and foreign minister were killed in a helicopter crash. You can stay up to date with all the goings-on in Westminster on our digital Politics Hub by scanning the QR code at the bottom of your screen, among the other stories that we've been covering that you can read about today. The Devon MP, who represents people affected by the water contamination in Brixton, Anthony Mangle, has been speaking in the Commons about his frustration of his constituents, saying the anger there is palpable. Plus, GB News could be punished by Ofcom over a programme featuring the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. The media watchdog says it started the process of considering a statutory sanction because it broke rules over due impartiality. All that and much more, just scan the QR code on the bottom of your screen. Right, let's return, shall we, to the infected blood inquiry. Our chief North of England correspondent, Greg Milam, has been speaking to one woman from Bridlington in Yorkshire who was infected by contaminated blood as a child. She says there should be prosecutions.
God, I'm shaking now because reality just kicked in.
It has been a long wait for Mel Mackay.
Oh gosh, there's loads of pages. I don't even know where to start.
Reading what she and so many thousands have known all along.
He's put, I have to report a catalogue of failures.
Finally, official recognition of how they were failed.
Systemic, collective and individual failures.
Mel was 5 years old when she was given a transfusion of infected blood during surgery. It left her with HIV and changed the course of her life.
Having HIV affected my life hugely. I've not been able to fulfil my dreams or aspirations in becoming a paediatric nurse, but also I've not been able to fulfil having a relationship or having a family of my own. I'm angry that the failings that happened where it should have never happened. I'm also relieved that we've finally got the answers that we've been waiting for, but also sad for the ones that are not here today to see justice, which, in a sense, breaks my heart.
Among them, her mum, who died in March.
One of the last things she said to me, I'm so, so proud of you for what you have done and what you have become. She was really proud of me, and that was special because it meant a lot.
She says whatever the complexities, the compensation now has to reach everyone touched by this scandal, and she wants more than that.
Do you think there should be prosecution?
Yes, definitely, because the government knew. They just was pushing it under the carpet and hoping that we'd all die. Because somebody dies every 4 days, and sadly they've not been here to see the final chapter, where today is a day for us that's been affected and infected by this tragic, long, infected blood scandal, where it should have never, ever happened in the first place.
Greg Milam, Sky News.
Thank you for that.
The Prime Minister has said that the government will pay whatever it costs on compensation, and we already have a good idea about what the government's approach will be. This is what the Chancellor told me on the Politics Hub at the start of the month.
And what this government wants is for justice to finally be done. And, you know, there will be an impact on public finances, but it won't have any impact on long-term public spending or long-term levels of taxation, because this is a one-off payment. But we are committed to making that one-off payment. These families have waited far too long, and we want to be the government that sorts this out once and for all.
Well, our political correspondent Darren McCaffrey is here. I mean, Jeremy Hunt's right, it has been far too long, hasn't it?
It really has, and it was really fascinating today listening to the Prime Minister apologise in the Commons, clearly from a position of heartfelt pain almost at the trauma that thousands of people have gone on through. But the thing I took away is just the sheer scale of this, Sophie, if you like. This dates back to the mid-70s. David Owen, who was Health Secretary in 74-75, was in Parliament today, effectively apologising, saying that he really should have taken the initiative. He said against medical advice at the time of banning foreign blood from being imported into Britain. Then you've got Ken Clarke, who was Health Secretary in the 80s, again, actually did not come out of this terribly well in terms of the testimony he provided. Stephen Dorrell, who was Health Secretary in the 90s on the TV today, right up to Jeremy Hunt, who of course was a Health Secretary for a long period of time. Theresa May was the Prime Minister who initiated this inquiry. And it's Rishi Sunak today apologising. I mean, we're talking about generations of politicians here. But you're right, the focus tomorrow will be on compensation. It will be on Jeremy Hunt and how much money the Treasury is prepared to put up. John Glenn, who's the Paymaster General, is going to set out the details. Could be up to 10 billion. But lots of the victims are complaining that this process, even going forward, could take a long period of time. They're talking about interim forms of compensation that we've seen with the post office scandal. It'll be interesting to see whether the government are prepared to do that. Just two other things I took away from today as well, politically, if you like, away from the victims, is Andy Burnham, who again also former Health Secretary, now Mayor of Manchester, was talking about how this needs to rock Whitehall. That this is not just about the NHS and medical professionals or indeed politicians, but civil servants too. And that civil servants may well have been involved in helping to cover up this scandal. And cover it up not just back in the 70s and 80s, but actually relatively recently as well. And he said that there needs to be a kind of root and branch look at the civil service and their role in this scandal too. And also this idea that maybe we do have a problem in this country. We've had Bloody Sunday, we've had the post office scandal, we have had this, there's talk about other scandals down the line. And what is it about our institutions, our government, and indeed Whitehall that might be stymieing progress in trying to get these scandals, not just to end, but indeed get them to be recognised as we've seen today?
Yeah, and that's what so many of the victims seem to be saying. They want the recognition, they want the truth, and for people to acknowledge that as well, don't they? Darren, thank you very much for talking us through, as you say, like a kind of generations-long failure of British state. Thank you. Well, what the government does on compensation is sure to feature in tomorrow's papers. We'll have our extended press preview and news review from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be Pippa Quirkier, the political editor of The Guardian, and Theo Usherwood, political journalist and broadcaster. Well, let's bring in our panel for this evening again, shall we? Mercy and Rhun join us again. Mercy, tomorrow the focus is going to shift to compensation. I mean, it's an awful lot of money for the government to have to find, isn't it?
It is, absolutely, but it's also very necessary, and it's also coming far too late, and it will also simultaneously never be enough. You can't compensate half of what these people have suffered, because it's not just the financial loss that many of them would have inevitably suffered. It would have been social ostracisation as well, in many cases, from the stigma that was attached to having, HIV yourself, or having a family member that had HIV. You know, I was reading earlier, somebody on Twitter had said, or X had posted that their mother, was sacked from her job at the bakery, basically because his father had become infected, and she couldn't work. And so we're talking about, yes, the money is great, but you can really never compensate the scale of devastation that has been left.
Yeah, that stigma is just, I mean, it's like Colin at the beginning that we were talking about throughout, the programme as well, the fact that his parents had to deal with that stigma around HIV, their child having HIV, abuse that they were given because of it. It just beggars belief, the whole thing.
And a family I met today whose father died more than a decade ago now, but he hadn't told them that he had been infected with HIV until they were way into their 20s. The shame around that. But there can be no further delay. People are still dying week in, week out as a result of this scandal. The money's symbolism more than anything, isn't it? But there is also compensation for huge financial losses that have been made by people. A year ago, Sir Brian Langstaff was reminding us today, he told government there can be no delay. Put the mechanisms in place now to get that money out to people. We're still waiting.
I mean, you've worked as an advisor before, haven't you, Mercy? I mean, how difficult is it for politicians to find this kind of money? I mean, it must be difficult.
Yeah, it inevitably is, especially given the state of our public finances at the moment. But I think finally, of course, we are seeing Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, we are seeing politicians acknowledging that this has to be done, and the government has said, whatever the cost, they will, foot that bill, and rightly so. I think the other thing that's been mentioned is potential convictions, or how any legal routes to accountability. we're not the only country that has had a blood scandal. France had a blood scandal, Canada, America, infected blood, and there were convictions there. The French minister back in the 90s was actually convicted for his role in the blood scandal, and there's been other convictions across the world. So clearly we're far, far behind in terms of holding people to account for what happened.
Yeah, and the proposals put forward, the recommendations to bring in new rules of candour, of accountability for senior civil servants as well, that's very, very important. And I was pleased that Dame Diana Johnson also thought that was very much a part of what we have to do to regain people's trust here, because it's not just the health issues, it's just not just the pain people have been through, it's that breaking down of trust even more in the establishment.
Yeah, the establishment, institutions, the state, I guess, isn't it? And thanks both very much. Coming up next on the Politics Hub. We're next for Iran and the wider region after the death of the president in a helicopter crash. I'll be speaking to our lead world presenter, Yalda Hakim. And we'll also speak to Rhun about whether the Welsh government can survive after his party ended its cooperation agreement with Welsh Labour. Hello, welcome back. You're watching the Politics Hub. Now, we spent a lot of today's programme talking about the infected blood inquiry, but I do want to move on to a big world news story, the confirmation that the Iranian president has been found dead, along with the country's foreign minister, after the helicopter crashed. Now, rescuers found the burn wreck of the helicopter over 12 hours after it came down in a mountainous area in northwest Iran. So far, there's been no official word on the cause, but there was thick fog in the area at the time. 5 days of national mourning have now been declared by Iran's supreme leader, and the vice president has been put in temporary charge. He has 50 days to organise an election. Well, our lead World News presenter, Yalda Hakim, is going to be bringing you full coverage of this story in her programme at 9 o'clock. Well, she joins us now to give us a bit of an update on that. So what do we know about this crash?
Well, Sophie, it was quite shocking news that came through, announced on state TV in Iran yesterday. We were told that there had been a hard landing of the president's helicopter. So then there was a great amount of speculation. Was it that the helicopter had just landed in a funny way? Was the president safe? Then there was news spreading that he'd managed to get in a car and had driven, made the rest of the journey by car. Now, of course, we now know that he was killed in that helicopter crash and bad weather is being blamed. He had gone to Azerbaijan for the opening of a dam. He was making his way back from the northwest of the country. There were 3 helicopters in total, so he was part of a convoy. The other 2 helicopters made it back. His did not. In a country like Iran, which is quite conspiratorial, and with an authoritarian regime where a lot of information doesn't come out, there will be many people speculating as to whether bad weather is the actual cause.
It's interesting you say that. And I just wonder, what does this mean for the stability of the region? Because I guess that's what a lot of people are going to be looking to tonight.
Iran is quite a unique country. It isn't the president that makes the calls or calls the shots. He's the figurehead. The country is run by, and the decisions of national security, foreign policy, for example, what we saw in Israel just a few weeks ago with the attack, 300 ballistic missiles and cruise missiles, drones that the Iranians used to launch an attack on Israel. That wouldn't have been a decision that was made by the president. The supreme leader makes those sorts of decisions. And so whether this sort of creates instability as a whole in the short term, no, I would say not. But in the long term, now Ibrahim Raisi was in the running to become the supreme leader. The supreme leader currently, Ali Khamenei, is 85 years old. He's aging. He won't be around forever. And Raisi was in the running alongside Ali Khamenei's son for the succession plan. So big questions now being asked about what that would actually potentially look like. Don't forget, in 1979, the Islamic Revolution, made up of all of these clerics and men that you see in Iran today running the country, replaced a hereditary monarchy. Thousands of years of kings and shahs and queens in the country replaced by these clerics. So now the idea that Ali Khamenei's position would be replaced by his son because they are having trouble replacing him will be big questions asked.
Really interesting. And you've got lots coming up on your programme as well, haven't you? A couple of interviews.
I do. I will be speaking with a young female protester inside Iran. She's incredibly brave, like many of these young women and girls who have been protesting. She'll be talking to us about the mood in the country, the pulse of the country.
OK, great. I'll look forward to that. Yalda, thank you very much indeed. And do make sure, of course, to join Yalda at 9 p.m. this evening for all the reaction to the president's death that we've just been discussing, and also, of course, more on what next for Iran and the Middle East. Well, we've been speaking to Rhun during the show, but we'd be pretty remiss, wouldn't we, if we didn't ask him about a big story in Wales from the end of last week, which is certain to reverberate over the coming weeks because his party, Plaid Cymru, ended its cooperation agreement with Welsh Labour. So tell us, what's going on?
The cooperation agreement was an agreement where we were in opposition, but we were delivering with government a set of policies over a set period of time. It came clear to us in recent weeks, since Vaughan Gething became First Minister, that there were some issues with attitude of government towards elements of the agreement. Plus, then there's the context of the £200,000 donation, a huge amount in Welsh politics, to Vaughan Gething's leadership campaign from a company that had been found guilty of environmental offences, who were looking to Welsh Government for permission to build a solar farm, who had taken a £400,000 loan from Welsh Government recently. And although the First Minister says, I've done nothing wrong here, I think there's an issue of perception here, an issue of judgment here. And I think between everything, it was becoming a distraction for the cooperation agreement. We thought now's the time to have a different relationship with Welsh Government.
Without trying to diminish the importance of looking into the loans and the leadership and, like you say, judgment, is it the most important thing just the best services possible for Welsh people? And do you really believe that that's what your decision is helping?
Yeah, we were very serious about the relationship. There's never been a single party with an overall majority in the story of Welsh devolution, so there's always has to be an element of cooperation. This was an innovative way of doing that, but you're always judging, as Welsh Government, I guess, would have been done as well. Are you getting out of it for communities in Wales, for people in Wales, as much as you're putting in? Is it working? Are you getting the results?
You need to be around the table, don't you? You've got to be around the table, don't you, to do that?
Yeah, and it's by being around the table that we were able to make sure that free school meals were introduced
for all
school or primary schools. It was coming to an end anyway, but it had become a distraction. And when you're unable to move ahead and deliver those things that you wanted to, then you look at it and make a decision. And from the response, I think most people agree that in the circumstances, this was the right thing to do. I have no doubt it was.
Look, I'll be honest, you speak to Conservative politicians, which I do a lot, and the thing that they always talk about is how bad the Welsh Government is and how bad things are in Wales compared to the rest of the UK. What would you say to that?
Well, listen, I'm never comfortable seeing Wales being used as a political football, which politicians here in Westminster often do. But there is no doubt that Welsh Labour, who have been leading government in Wales for the whole of devolution, is failing to deliver on health, on education, on all those things in public service that we want to see a big improvement on. Now, it's not something that Labour are able to duck. And as an opposition party, it's my job to hold them to account on that, plus our vision, an alternative vision of a sort of a fairer, more ambitious Wales that we think Labour, stagnating in government for all these years, is unable to deliver.
But why has Plaid Cymru not managed to cut through? Is that a fair question?
I mean, it's a question that is asked. I trust in democracy at the end of the day.
Has it really rewarded you, though? Has it, democracy?
Have we had? We've been in government. I have no doubts that we will be able to move ahead in terms of electoral success in Wales. But we have to change politics in Wales. We have to get people to think about politics in a different way. Labour have run Wales for 100 years and old habits die hard. But I am determined that if we can sell that vision of a Wales that thinks differently, that breaks away from that stagnation of a government that is so risk averse, it does nothing, well, let's have a change. And my job as leader of the party is to sell that change to people.
Labour, of course, running Wales, they could be running Westminster by the end of the year. Would you support a Keir Starmer Labour government?
Well, I think what's interesting is Labour, when the Conservatives are in power at Westminster, say it's all their fault. It's all their fault down the far end of the M4 for not giving us enough money and so on. And I agree with them up to a point. But there'll come a time when, presumably, Keir Starmer will be Prime Minister before long, when Labour in Wales won't be able to do that anymore. They will have to own their mistakes. They will have to own the relationship between themselves and UK government. And in doing so, that gives us an opportunity to show, don't go blaming. Give us some ideas. And Plaid is all about ideas.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Good to have you on the show. Still to come on the Politics Hub. The only thing when they're winning, how politicians marked a weekend of end-of-season drama on the football pitch. Lucy Powell, very happy there.
Coming up at 8 on the UK Tonight, a special programme on the landmark infected blood reports. It is the biggest treatment disaster in NHS history. 30,000 people infected, 3,000 have died. Well, today, vindication for the victims, as the report finds the scandal was not an accident, and some of those in power try to cover it up. I'm going to be joined in the studio tonight by victims and their families. That's the UK Tonight at 8.
I'm Martin Brunt, and I'm Sky's crime correspondent. My most memorable story was, and still is, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann.
Please, please do not hurt her. Please give our little girl back.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news.
For detectives, the first 48 hours after a murder are crucial in the search for clues. The public expects them to find Jill Dando's killer soon. The British detectives are planning to meet forensic experts, academics, and even witch doctors.
I remember the grimmest case. the Sower murders of schoolgirls Holly and Jessica. I felt I can't undo what's happened, but I can help explain it. Ian Huntley was arrested and charged within a fortnight of the murders.
I've never murdered anyone, I've never raped anyone. What am I in jail for?
The parole board has to decide if Bronson needs to be kept locked up for the safety of the public. My biggest challenge was to persuade a jailed diamond thief to answer my letters. Martin Brunt, Sky News, at the Old Bailey.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Now, of course, big news over the weekend came not from the political scene, but the world of sport, because it was the last day of the Premier League. Man City won a record-breaking fourth Premier League title in a row after beating West Ham 3-1 at the Etihad Stadium on the final day of the season. Now, among the MPs who were enjoying the climax of the top flight, it was Labour's Lucy Powell, who was out celebrating City's win yesterday. There's a great photo of her cheering on with her son. Labour's chair, Annalise Dodds, also celebrating Oxford United's big victory in the League One playoff final at Wembley. Playoffs, I think, in some ways, always actually like the biggest moments. And Rishi Sunak even, he was spotted taking the evening off on Friday to watch Southampton face West Brom in the Championship playoff semi-final. That's to come. But I can't actually believe I'm doing this, by the way. But you know what? I'm just going to go for it. Watch out, Pep, because there was another league-winning team who triumphed over the weekend. Here we go. There are the boys. Here in Westminster, there's a somewhat prestigious fantasy football league where you have hacks, advisors, some politicos. And this year, after a gruelling campaign, very, very tight at the top of the table, the team finishing top again was the one and only Sheffield Thursday. Now, I promise I wasn't going to make a massive deal about this, honestly. But my production team twisted my arm, so they insisted. Honestly, I inform you that, yes, that's my team. This is, I think it was Mateta who got me over the line. It's not even a humble brag, is it? It's just a straightforward brag. But you know what? I feel like it's my greatest achievement as a political journalist, so I'm allowing myself.
But finding the time to keep a fantasy football team
I mean, this is it, isn't it?
Season.
It's basically outing myself as a huge loser, I think, actually.
I think that's really good. You do have a son. I bet your son's impressed. Do you have a son?
He's 2, so I can't even blame him.
Well, he will be impressed.
Me.
I think it's an impressive thing. I think it makes you the cool mum, actually.
But you have got to invest a lot of time and...
It's a lot of time.
Yeah, you have to have in-depth football knowledge for this. I've started off some fantasy football teams around tournaments and that kind of thing, but I've never seen it through. I don't know how successful.
You've probably got more going on in your life, I'd imagine. Mercy, how about you? Any kind of embarrassing, time-consuming obsessions?
Not that I can say at this time. I'm actually quite a boring person, actually. So I don't have any sort of weird, odd hobbies. So I think credit to you for having at least a hobby.
I love it. I think it's something about being really competitive, actually. You know, I think that's definitely my kind of driving force here, actually.
Yeah. I prefer the actual football, I must say. I'm a Cardiff City fan, so I like sort of disappearing at the end of of a Senedd session for a midweek game or something.
I think I only get into it when it's the World Cup, which is amazing because of the atmosphere of it. So I really do get into it then. But other than that, I mean, my team's Northampton, which is like nowhere to be seen. I don't even know where they are in the league. But
you've got the Euros coming up. You can get excited about the Euros, maybe.
Oh, that's the sole point. I was there when we didn't quite make it on the penalty shootout against Poland.
Painful.
So it was very painful.
But, it's quite interesting, isn't it? And there's quite a lot of talk about, kind of Keir Starmer doing a lot of football visits. We've got Rishi Sunak at Southampton. Do you think it cuts through? Is it quite good to show you're, down with the football?
I coached juniors rugby for 10 years, and including up a few years after I became elected. So I think I've always found sport to be a good release. Music too. Get my guitar out or watch a game of football, be happy.
I love it. That's brilliant.
Do you have a victory dance, by the way?
No, only when the camera has finished. That is definitely not being shown on TV. But yeah, I'm sure there'll be a lap of honour at some point. I can't believe I've admitted to this. But anyway, thank you very much for joining us tonight. I will see you tomorrow at 7. And thank you for a really interesting panel as well. Great to have you both on the programme. Up next, it is the UK Tonight with Sarah J. Mee. And then, of course, Yada Hakim with The World, which is on at 9 p.m. Thanks, as always, for joining us on the Politics Hub.